Have you ever met someone that you felt was truly evil? A strange look or a creepy sensation that tells you there's something dark hiding behind their eyes? In today's episode, we're going to go over the top 10 most disturbing encounters with a monster. These stories come straight from the Reddit community and are sure to send chills down your spine. Sit back and brace yourself as we dive into our first story.
Investigation Hour. Viewer discretion is advised.
In late one summer 2002 night, my girlfriend called me crying. She ran to the supermarket and had someone following her for a few minutes on her winding trip home around the LSU lakes. She was house sitting for her aunt in a large home and got to the point where she did a lap around the lake and her follower was still there. My roommate and I jumped into his car and raced over. She described the vehicle as a white pickup truck, and when we got there, parked on the street one house away from her aunt's home was the vehicle. She was still crying and recounted being followed, the elaborate path, etc. I looked and there was a man sitting in the vehicle. My roommate snuck up in the bushes to back me up, and I walked about 25 feet from the vehicle, standing up on the curb and shouted, "Something I can help you with?" And they cranked up, turned on headlights, and drove off, giving me a brief glance. I didn't see him in person, but did see him again the following year when he was arrested for a series of murders in the greater Baton Rouge area, and his name was Derek Todd Lee. When I was younger, people from my town and the surrounding towns would be invited over to this farm for a barbecue. The farm was, I believe, a pig farm, where the owner would raise his pigs and sell them for meat. Every year, he'd have one of these barbecues where people would show up and eat these pigs. My family never went. It just didn't seem like our thing. Well, little did everyone know that this man, Willie Pickton, had been murdering women and feeding them to his pigs, which he later killed and fed to people at these barbecues. I know tons of people who are vegetarians now who went to these barbecues. When my mom was 16, she was sleeping and woke up to someone trying to open her bedroom window. She ran to my grandma's room and told her someone was trying to break in. My grandma, being the crazy awesome lady she is, grabs a bat and runs outside and confronts this guy and starts swinging. The guy runs off and they don't think too much of it. Sometime later, my grandma sees this guy on the news, and it's Richard Ramirez. My mom told the story over and over when I was growing up. She easily could have been one of his victims. I'm so grateful she wasn't, especially since she was pregnant with me at the time. I grew up in Fort Walton Beach, Florida, and in the early 1980s, my friend and I would bike to the Junior Food Store, a convenience store, to play Galaga every chance we could. There was a weird guy that would come harass us who was about 2 or 3 years older than us. We were 11 or 12. My friend liked to get into fights, so he started calling him Charlie to fluster him. The dude had a huge knife in his boot every time we saw him, so I decided to just ignore him. That was pretty much how it went for the entire summer, and he'd even play Galaga with us occasionally. It turns out the guy was Frank Walls. Frank Walls is an American serial killer who was sentenced to die for killing 5 people across Ocean City, Florida, from 1985 to 1987. He was arrested at the young age of 19 on July 24th, 1987, making him one of the youngest serial killers in American history. Not my own story, but some family friends of ours had an experience with the Zodiac Killer. They were together in their car on Lover's Lane, or whatever the spot was called where couples went to hook up. The wife got a weird feeling in her gut and begged the husband to leave. He was kind of upset because he was in town for one night from the military, so this was their one night together. Finally, she convinced him to leave. They told the only other couple at the spot that they were leaving because at the time the Zodiac was known to be active, so people kept an eye out for each other. Years later, the Zodiac wrote into the newspaper detailing one of his killings on Lover's Lane. He described the exact car and said there were 2 couples left and he was going to take both out before one of the couples went up to the other and gave them a heads up before leaving. Right when they left, he killed the couple that stayed. Every detail of the night, from the date to the cars to the time of night, matched up perfectly, so they knew it was them who left just in time. When I was 7, a man knocked on our door at about 8:30 at night. My mom and I were in the living room watching TV. My mom answered the door, and he said something about selling newspapers. She said she wasn't interested, and as she tried to close the door, he tried to force his way inside. She always had the chain latch on, and she kicked the door closed on his arm as he tried to grab for her. He ran away, and she called the police. About a year later, Cleophas Prince Jr. was arrested for killing 6 women, mostly in our neighborhood. My mom recognized him as the man who tried to force his way in that night. It was my biological dad's 30th birthday, and we decided to throw him a surprise party and invited a bunch of people from his work. My brother and I were in our room playing on the Sega Genesis because it was all adults and we just wanted to stay out of their way. While we were playing together, a dude comes in and sits on our bed to watch us play. He said his name was Danny and asked us a bunch of weird questions. Do you take the bus to school? How old are you? What's your favorite food? He gave us a bad vibe and just seemed off somehow, like he was too interested in what we were doing. My mom comes in and sees him in there with us and tells us to go watch movies in her room, so my brother and I say goodbye and go to her room instead. A couple months later, my parents were watching the news and Danny is on the TV. He ended up being Daniel Conahan Jr., the Hog Trail Killer. He killed over a dozen homosexual men in our area and had tortured them and left them tied to trees in the woods to die. So this is third hand, but an old boss went to the University of Utah and was in a sorority. One day she was waiting for her date in front of her sorority house with a girlfriend who was also waiting for her date. Her girlfriend's date pulls up, but her girlfriend forgets something and runs back into the house. My former boss chatted to the man for a few minutes. She noted that he was polite and handsome. Her girlfriend comes out and they leave in his VW Beetle. My former boss gets picked up by her date a short while later, and she thinks nothing of it. The next day, she sees her girlfriend and asks how the date was. The girlfriend says that they started driving in her date's VW Beetle, and all of a sudden, she got a splitting headache. She thought it was really strange, but she felt nauseous. She apologized and asked him to take her home. He was a little upset, but he dropped her back off. They didn't go out again. Years pass, and my former boss is watching the news one night and sees a familiar man on the screen. It was Ted Bundy. Journalist at a local newspaper doing the Sunday evening shift got a call about a guy whose car had been hijacked with his 2-year-old son in it. I met him at the police station to interview him, get a pic of the kid so we could publish, and ask people to be on the lookout, etc. The man was devastated. I'd been a journalist for years, traveled all over, I was no pushover, and generally really good at reading people. This man was clearly in a state. I had a hard time staying professional and not bawling my eyes out in front of him. At the end of the interview, I clasped his hands tightly, trying to convey how awful I found his situation to be. I told him all I could do was write the best story possible. Maybe someone would read it, see the pic, and help find the kid. I didn't sleep that night. The next day off after a weekend shift, one of my colleagues phoned me. They'd found the body of the little boy at a rubbish dump, and they'd arrested his father for the murder. He had issues with the boy's mother, so murdered his own son out of spite or something. I don't know. I don't want to know. He made up the story of the hijacking. All I know is I shook the same hands that had killed a little boy. I cried for him while he just played me, knowing he'd killed his son just hours before. That haunted me for years. I used to work for the city of Pensacola, Florida, as a computer operator. They had two mainframes, one in City Hall and the other in the City Hall annex across the parking lot. And I had to run backups on both machines. I should mention that I'm female, and at the time I had long, dark hair. So one night I was walking across the parking lot. I worked at night and spotted a Volkswagen Bug sitting in the parking lot with some man in it. He got out of the Bug, and I could see he had his arm in a cast with a sling. He looked raggedy and tired. "Miss, could you come here for a moment? I need some help," he said. I got the creeps from him and told him I'd call the emergency line from City Hall for him. He said no, he didn't need the cops. It was just a simple thing he needed help with because his arm was in a sling. I felt even creepier, so I walked really fast, almost running really, up to City Hall and went in the back door. I turned to lock the door and was shocked to see this man leap up the stairs and try to push his way into the door, but I got it locked in time. I immediately called the police department and got an officer to check out the parking lot, but the car and the driver were long gone. I asked the officer if they would mind staying around the parking lot for the rest of the night, and they got that set up. The rest of the night was uneventful, and I went home in the morning. About 3 days later, Ted Bundy was arrested about 2 miles from City Hall in a stolen VW Bug, which matched my description. I dodged Ted Bundy. Thanks for listening. If you're into solved and unsolved crimes and strange mysteries, subscribe to us so you don't miss out on our weekly videos released every Monday at 2 p.m. Pacific Time. If you enjoyed this video, give us a like. It would really help us out.